Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel, AnatomyMentor. Today I'm going to have a video lecture on the topic which is development of body cavities. Now this is a topic of general embryology and we have discussed before this the formation of trilaminar germ disc and the folding of the embryo. So today our learning objectives are going to be that we shall describe the division of the lateral plate mesoderm into visceral and parietal layers enclosing the intraembryonic coelom or body cavity. Also, we'll describe the extent of intraembryonic coelom after folding and its divisions into three serous cavities. Also, we'll demonstrate the pericardio-peritoneal canals and their final fate, and in the end, correlate this with the ventral body defects. So, let's start with today's discussion on the body cavities. Now, the word that is used in embryology for cavity is coelom, and major fluid-filled cavities, they can be seen to form both within the embryo as well as outside the embryo, and these are known as intraembryonic and extraembryonic cavities, respectively. Now, we're talking about the early stages of intrauterine life. The intraembryonic coelom, that is the body cavity inside the embryo, is initially a single primitive cavity which lies within the mesoderm layer. If you recall from the previous lectures on general embryology, in the early stages, in the third week of intrauterine life, a trilaminar germ disc is established, and that is what comprises the human embryo. And the three layers in this germ disc are ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. So remember, it is within the mesoderm, that is the germ layer which is sandwiched between ectoderm and endoderm, that the intraembryonic coelom is going to appear. And that intraembryonic coelom will eventually form the three major body cavities, namely pericardial, pleural, and peritoneal. Now, here are the three body cavities which you can see in the adult form. You've got the thoracic cavity, which is subdivided into the pleural and pericardial cavities. And then you've got this here abdominopelvic cavity. Now, to achieve this structure, let's look at what happens to the trilaminar germ disc. So you know that this is the flattened germ disc. This is the beginning of every human being. This is our appearance in the third week of intrauterine life. And if we look at a cross section of this germ disc, we shall see the three germ layers, which are the ectoderm, mesoderm, and the endoderm. And it is the mesoderm which subdivides into three further compartments, that is the paraxial portion, intermediate portion, and the lateral plate. Now we are looking at the series of sections. These are the cross sections through the trilaminar germ disc. A, B, C, and D, they are in a chronological sequence. And you can see above the trilaminar germ disc is the amniotic cavity. Below the trilaminar germ disc is the yolk sac cavity. So here are the three germ layers, ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. And you can see that clefts or spaces are going to appear over here within this mesodermal germ layer. At the same time, it is subdividing into the paraxial mesoderm, the intermediate mesoderm, and towards the outer aspect, this is the lateral plate mesoderm. You can see the clefts or spaces are appearing in the lateral plate mesoderm. So in the diagram C, because of the appearance of the spaces within the lateral plate mesoderm, it becomes split into two layers. One is the somatic or parietal layer, and this is the layer which is going to be adjacent to the ectoderm. And the other is this here splanchnic or visceral layer, which is adjacent to the endoderm. And between these two layers of lateral plate mesoderm, this here is the cavity. You could say it has appeared because of the union of those clefts or spaces, and this is called intraembryonic cavity or the primitive body cavity or the primitive body coelom. Now, what happens during the further stages of development is that the lateral body wall folds are going to form. Now, the lateral body wall folds, they are going to be responsible for converting the shape of the embryo from a flat germ disc to a three-dimensional cylindrical structure. At first, the left and right sides of intraembryonic cavity are in open connection with the extraembryonic cavity. So here you can see the intraembryonic cavities, they are communicating with this here extraembryonic cavity. The arrows are showing the direction of movement of the lateral body wall folds. And as they approach each other towards the midline, you can see this folding of the embryo is eventually going to cause a closure of the ventral body wall. And because of that closure of the ventral body wall, you can see Now over here, a large intraembryonic cavity extending from thoracic to pelvic region is formed. So over here, this is the abdominal portion of that intraembryonic body cavity now, which is the primitive body cavity. This is the portion which is surrounding the gut tube. This is the portion of that cavity. Also, I would like you to notice that you can see two tubes over here. This is a cross section of the embryo. So you can see as neurulation occurs in the neural tube, similarly, you can see the endoderm rolls upon itself to form the gut tube. So this is in simple words explained as tube on top of a tube. And this is the series of events which are taking place during the folding of the embryo. And this here is the yolk sac cavity. As the body wall folds approach each other, initially there is a temporary communication between the part of the endoderm which is going to form gut tube and the part of the yolk sac which is known as the secondary yolk sac, and this communication is known as the vitelline duct. But when these lateral body wall folds fuse, that will cause the obliteration and degeneration of the vitelline duct. Now, coming back to the intraembryonic cavity, which is the primitive body cavity, as I told you initially, it is going to form these cavities in the human being, the pericardial cavity, the two pleural cavities, and the peritoneal cavity. Pericardial cavity is the one surrounding the heart. The pleural cavities are surrounding the lungs, and they are in turn derived from the pericardio-peritoneal canals. We'll be talking about them in the next slides. And then you've got the peritoneal cavity, which is the abdominal cavity. Now, while we are discussing this sequence of events, we should also look at this here cranial portion of the sagittal section of the embryo. And the phenomenon which is taking place over here is the head folding, or we could say the cranial folding. Now, what happens is that during this phenomenon, the heart and the pericardial cavity, if you focus over here on the laser pointer, this is the region of the developing heart and it is surrounded by pericardial cavity. This is lying anterior to this oropharyngeal membrane, right? And anterior, we could say cranial. We could say cranial to this here oropharyngeal membrane. But what happens is that as the primordial brain grows, it is going to cause the formation of the head fold. And as the head fold forms, you can see the direction of movement of this arrow. This will bring the developing heart as well as its surrounding pericardial cavity ventrally and caudally. Caudal now to this oropharyngeal membrane. So this is a shifting in the position of the developing heart in relation to, you can see the foregut. This here is the area of the foregut, which is lined by this here yellow line showing us the endoderm. So this is the repositioning of the body structures. Now, what are the pericardio-peritoneal canals? These are the paired canals you can see over here in this diagram, which is showing you a portion of the human embryo at approximately 5 weeks with parts of body wall and septum transversum removed. So the remaining part that is visible is showing you this here foregut, which is in yellow. And you can see anterior to the foregut, the remaining part of septum transversum. Now, septum transversum is a sheet of mesoderm, which is separating this here primitive thoracic cavity above from the primitive abdominal cavity below. Or you could say it is present between the thoracic cavity above and the yolk sac duct, that is white line duct below. Now, this septum transversum, immediately behind the septum transversum on either side of the foregut are two canals or passageways. These are known as the pericardio-peritoneal canals because they are the communication of the primitive thoracic cavity above with the primitive abdominal cavity below. So the pericardio-peritoneal canals pass dorsolateral to the foregut and dorsal to the septum transversum. Division of intraembryonic body cavity. Now, the division of our intraembryonic body cavity is made possible by the appearance of the folds, which are known as pleuropericardial folds. Now, they appear in the lateral wall of each pericardio-peritoneal canal. As the name indicates, pleuropericardial, these folds are going to divide the primitive thoracic cavity into the pleural cavities and the pericardial cavity. The folds themselves contain the common cardinal vein and the phrenic nerve. Now here we can see, if we take a cross section of the human embryo at this stage of development, then we can see over here on either side, this is the area of the pericardio-peritoneal canals. And here has appeared the pleuropericardial fold. These are the paired folds, and within each lies the phrenic nerve and the common cardinal vein. Now these pleuropericardial folds, they are going to subdivide this primitive thoracic cavity into this pericardial cavity ventrally, which is surrounding the heart, and the paired pleural cavities dorsally over here. And within these pleural cavities, you can see the lung buds, they are expanding. So with the continued growth of the lungs, the pleural cavities are pushed forward in the body wall towards the ventral medial line, thus separating the pericardium from the lateral thoracic walls. And eventually you can see that these pleuropericardial folds, which are now thinning out and now they can be called membranes, they are approaching each other and they will eventually fuse, and then they will completely separate the pleural cavities, which contain the lungs, from the pericardial cavity, which contains the heart. During further development, the opening between the prospective pleural and peritoneal cavities is closed by crescent-shaped folds. Another pair of folds appears known as the pleuroperitoneal folds, and they're going to project into the caudal, that is the lower end of the pericardio-peritoneal canals. So don't get confused. We're talking about three separate anatomical structures over here. First are the pericardio-peritoneal canals. Second are the pleuropericardial folds, which were responsible for subdividing the thoracic cavity. And then you've got the pleural peritoneal folds or membranes, which are responsible for separation of the abdominal cavity from the pleural cavities. And remember, two of these, they start with the word pleuro, and then the third one, it starts with the word pericardio. So these are the separate structures, separate anatomical structures. Now that we've discussed the formation of body cavities, we're going to talk about the ventral body wall defects. So if there is some you could see a defect which is known as the ventral body wall defect, we would assume that the body wall closure has been incomplete, and that can lead to different clinical conditions, different congenital abnormalities. Namely, we're going to talk about ectopia cordis, gastroschisis, and the bladder and cloacal extrophy. So first, let's talk about ectopia cordis. What is ectopia cordis? Well, if the ventral body wall fails to fuse completely in the thoracic region, then that can cause the ectopia cordis, in which you can see the heart is going to be outside the body. And this is showing us over here that condition. Whereas in the abdominal region, if the ventral body wall folds fail to fuse completely, it can cause a defect in the abdominal body wall. And here is gastroschisis. In gastroschisis, the defect typically occurs on the right side of the umbilicus. And so you can see that causes herniation of abdominal contents. They emerge from this defect and they're present on the outer aspect of the body, and they're not covered by amnion. And so they're exposed to the amniotic fluid. And this condition is known as gastroschisis. We need to differentiate this condition from omphalocele. Omphalocele is not in reality a ventral body wall defect, although it is sometimes classified as a ventral body wall defect, but it is not as such a defect in the body wall. It is basically due to the physiological umbilical herniation, in which case the herniated intestinal loops fail to return to the abdominal cavity. So physiological umbilical herniation, the word physiological shows that this is a normal process, and normally it occurs in the 6th week of intrauterine life, that temporarily the intestinal contents, they enter the umbilical cord, and then later on in the 10th week, they return to the abdominal cavity. If they fail to return, then that would mean, as you can see over here, the intestinal contents of the baby are still protruding through the umbilicus outside the body, within the umbilical cord, and over here they are covered by the layer of amnion. This condition is known as omphalocele, and we need to differentiate it from the condition, the true ventral body wall defect, that was gastroschisis. So here is a table showing us the important differences between gastroschisis and omphalocele, and I've already told you the cause. If we look at the defect, we saw that in case of gastroschisis, there is a defect to the right side of the umbilicus, but in case of omphalocele, the defect is actually the umbilical cord, through the umbilical cord itself, that the loops of bowel and other viscera have herniated. And as I showed you that in case of gastroschisis, amnion is not covering the affected loops of bowel, so they're exposed to the harmful effects of the amniotic fluid, whereas in case of omphalocele, it is covered by the amnion. So the complications because of exposure to amniotic fluid that can occur would be in case of gastroschisis, that the bowel can be damaged by the corrosive effect of amniotic fluid, and also there's a high risk of volvulus, that's the twisting of the intestinal loops compromising blood supply. And remember, in gastroschisis, other defects can occur, but it is usually not associated with chromosomal abnormalities. In contrast, the omphalocele is associated with severe malformations, including cardiac abnormalities and neural tube defects, and the chromosomal abnormalities are present in 15% of cases. The incidence rate, remember, is higher in case of gastroschisis, but it has a better prognosis, whereas omphalocele, it has a higher mortality rate. Now let's come to the next ventral body wall defect. If the ventral body wall fails to close in the pelvic region, if it fails to close in the pelvic region, then that is going to cause the bladder extrophy. So here you can see the bladder is exposed. There's a defect over here in the pelvic region. The anterior wall of the bladder is also typically missing. And since the bladder is exposed, this can cause urinary infections. It can also lead to carcinoma. And it might also involve the dorsal surface or aspect of the penis that is known as epispadias. So here is a baby with bladder extrophy and epispadias. Now, in the severe form, if there is a defect in the pelvic region, a ventral body wall defect, then that leads to cloacal extrophy, in which the rectum and urinary bladder, which are both derived from the cloaca, they are exposed. So now that we've discussed the ventral body wall defects, and before that we talked about the formation of body cavities, I'm going to discuss a few MCQs related to this topic, and you should be able to answer these MCQs. So the first one is that the expression of, I told you, a tube on a tube describes the spatial arrangement of which two embryonic structures. Well, we denoted this expression to the neural tube, which is present on top of the gut tube. Which specific layer of mesoderm is directly involved in the formation of the primitive body cavity? That was the lateral plate mesoderm. We said the lateral plate mesoderm is the one between its parietal and visceral layers. There is appearance of the intraembryonic body cavity, which is also known as primitive body cavity or coelom. Somatopleural is a composite structure formed by which of the following layers? Well, when we use the word somatopleural, we mean the parietal layer of lateral plate mesoderm, that is its somatic layer, plus the overlying surface ectoderm. So they're collectively known as the somatopleural. By the end of the 4th week, the primitive body cavity is a continuous space. During further development, it will subdivide into, as I told you, the primitive body cavity is going to subdivide into 3 sections, that is pericardial, pleural, and abdominopelvic body cavities. The narrow connection between the midgut region and the yolk sac is known as the vitelline duct. When does this duct typically degenerate along with the yolk sac? So remember that it is between the 2nd and 3rd months of gestation in which the vitelline duct is going to degenerate. So this concludes with today's discussion of the development of body cavities, ventral body wall defects. And so this is a very tricky topic because you need to develop a conceptual understanding of the body cavities. And for that, I'm also going to share some videos, and you can look at those videos and you can follow the links of those videos, and they are going to give you a holistic approach of what is happening when we're talking about the folding of the embryo and the formation and subdivision of the different body cavities. So thank you for today's patience, and best of luck with your exams. And next time I'm going to be discussing a topic which is related to this one. It's in a series of lectures, and that is the development of the diaphragm. Thank you. Take care. Stay blessed.